And welcome on in to the latest edition of the Blue Horseshoe podcast. He is George Bremer. I am Ryan Hickey. We are talking to you here on Sunday morning after the Colts fall to the Bills 23-19 in a preseason opener. Some bad, George, some good. Let's start with the good. Let's start, obviously, with the man who everyone's focused on and talking about, Anthony Richardson and his debut. Overall, George, your thoughts on debut number one for Richardson in his 3 drives was?
I thought it was on the high end of our expectations. I mean, we said in the preview, both of us, we thought it would struggle. I think you said like 3 of 8, 3 of 9, something like that. And that's where, I was in the same ballpark. I'm not saying that to try to call anybody out. That's where I think we were at. We were thinking it was going to look pretty ugly because it's first time out there, and Buffalo is generally a pretty hostile environment. Proved to be the case again, even for a preseason game on Saturday, not just the crowd, the weather. They didn't get the rain, but they got ridiculous winds up there. He had bad field position most of the day. So I thought 7-12, all things considered, was on the higher end of my expectations. Obviously, there's a lot of work to do. We know there's going to be a lot of ups and downs. We didn't really get to see much of his running ability, which is disappointing because it's one of the things I was looking forward to. But I also understand that. It's a game that doesn't count. You probably don't want to expose your quarterback to a bunch of extra shots. I do think if that pass to Alec Pierce ends up in the end zone like it should, we're probably talking a lot differently about the overall day. Just because I think the overall opinion of his performance, if there's a long touchdown pass in there, is going to look different. But all in all, for a guy whose experience is the number one thing that you're worried about, to go out there and throw an interception on 4th or 5th play of the game, and then bounce back the way he did, I thought that was a net positive.
I'm with you. Like, if you take this game, right? I know it's hard to do, but if we take yesterday's performance and extrapolate it out for the entire season and say that's how his rookie year is going to be, I would say, George, you would feel really good after year number one, or pretty good, I should say, after year number one, because clearly there's a lot of ups, a lot of downs, but I thought there was more good than bad on Saturday. And again, one of the things that we've been watching and talking about, we saw kind of play out in front of our eyes on Saturday, was the fact he throws a pick, right? It's inevitable. Those bad decisions and those bad plays are going to happen. And what did he do the next 2 drives? Move the ball, come back, be better, make some really nice throws to Kylan Granson, make that beautiful Alec Pierce pass, like you mentioned. If it's a touchdown, we're 100% talking about that differently. It was a beautiful touch on it, put it right where the receiver needed it to be in a tightly contested play too, where the DB was right over him. So it's not like it was like a wide open window he's thrown it to. It was a tough throw that he made a nice drop in the bucket to. So it's like there was some bad, but I thought really coming out of that, you feel pretty good. Like you said, you didn't see it all, and not everything Shane Steichen's going to do it with Anthony Richardson was going to be on display in preseason game number one. You mentioned it on our preview pod. I think you're 100% right. He's holding a lot back, right? We don't really know what this offense fully is going to look like until week number one, and they're going to try to hold that advantage to themselves. And so even in the limited scope of the offense of what it's going to look like, I still think we saw more bad than good, which again, if we're sitting here after week 18, we're talking about a rookie year from Anthony Richardson where there's more bad than good. I think you're feeling pretty good about that, George, overall for 2023.
And the other thing I thought on the interception, I thought it was a good sign that everybody took blame after the game. It was Richardson said, it's on me. I've got to make a better throw. I've got to give him a better chance there. McKenzie said during the broadcast, it was on him that he should have, it was miscommunication and he should have read something in the defense. And then Shane Steichen said it was on him that he put them in a bad position, that the Bills gave them a different look, and he has to coach that better. So that to me, though, is good because it tells you that the other thing that as a rookie growing through this, you want to know that everybody's on the same page, that support's there. And the fact that the receiver and the head coach both came out and said, it's not his fault, it's mine, while Richardson himself said, no, it's on me. It just tells me everybody's on the same page. And I think that environment he needs to grow is definitely there.
Accountability, without a doubt, was there, like you said. And it's a good sign because that means everyone is motivated to get better and make sure it doesn't happen again. And speaking of, post-game comments, I really liked one word Shane Steichen used when describing Richardson's debut, and that was poise. And I think, you watch that, George, and I think he's right. The interception, it's a bad read, bad throw. Like I said, it was there were plenty that went into that where it wasn't just on him. But I think the one thing you can say about the interception that didn't happen there was that he was sped up. Like, he wasn't someone, you see it a lot with rookies. The game is so fast. You're not really processing. Your game is sped up. You don't look very comfortable. He looked poised in the pocket. He wasn't dipping at the first sign of danger. He held in there. Like, he looked like someone who was comfortable, George, which for a guy coming in, having 13 career starts after high school combined up to this point, to say comfortable already in your preseason debut as a rookie, George, I think that's a really, really good sign going forward.
Yeah, and obviously there's things that he's going to want to clean up, and there's things he's going to work on. I think that interception from watching it on TV, it did look like he initially wanted to throw the ball away, and then he kind of got caught in indecision, and ended up trying to make a play where he probably didn't need to, trying to be a hero there when he didn't need to be. Again, I think that's something that's going to happen throughout his rookie year. I mean, it's to me, even that is a positive, because it one, it made him deal with adversity, and we saw the way he bounced back. But two, it's a great learning moment. He's going to face that again, 100 times over the course of this season. And so he can draw back to his very first game, and maybe the next time he will just throw it out. Although he did say in the post game, I obviously wasn't there, I was reading through the transcripts. He did say in the post game that he wasn't sure whether he was still in the pocket, so he wasn't sure whether there was a flag. And maybe, in the future, he would go ahead and risk the flag, that the flag's better there, obviously, than the turnover.
And that's one of those things, like you said, like sometimes, like, I don't know about for you, George. I know for me, like, the best way to learn something is kind of do it. And then if you do it wrong, you remember, okay, now this is not how to do it. I think that's one of those things where, like you said, like Richardson learned, like, okay, you're right. Now, next time going back, you remember in your brain real time. What the flag you see, like I said, is the intentional grounding, or the risk of intentional grounding, is a lot better than throwing a pick deep in your own end. And you could survive that compared to throwing a turnover. And we saw 2 plays later, the Bills cashing for a touchdown. Big difference there between a 10-yard penalty and a turnover that leads to 7 points. So it's like you said, especially in a game that doesn't count, it's great to see him tested right away. Your first drive not going exactly how you want, and to still bounce back, lead 2 longer drives, lead what should have been a touchdown drive, instead of Alec Pierce hauls that one pass in. I think we're talking about his debut a lot differently, but definitely, like I said, I think a lot more good than bad. His nice run that was called back, so it didn't count, but his nice run deep in the Bills' territory that got taken back by penalty was, again, nice display of his athleticism. You see how fast and how big he is right away. So it's going to be a lot of fun, George, kind of seeing Richardson develop this year. I think definitely a good first test coming out of Buffalo for sure. Speaking of a test, speaking of another area we were kind of watching to see how they're going to improve, that was the offensive line. Now, this is their first true test of the preseason, going against a different team, going against mostly Buffalo Bills starters who do have a really good defense as well. And it was one of those, George, where it was definitely up and down. For Richardson, I feel more good than bad about how he played in his debut. For the offensive line, tell me, maybe I'm being too critical. I felt more bad than good. And some of the stats might indicate otherwise. Deion Jackson almost had 6 yards of carrying. So you can look at that and say, well, they were getting a push up front. But maybe this is me, George, holding on to something too much and more than I should. But second drive of the game, you get down, I believe it's 2nd and 4. You run the ball 3 times in a row in 2nd and 4. It's like 2nd and 4, 3rd and 2, 4th and 1. I think it was a 3 yardages and downs to go. And you could not get a first down. And you really could not get any sort of push. And we talked about last year, that was one of the biggest Achilles heels for this team, was they could not get any short yardage conversions whatsoever. And again, I know it's one drive. I know it's the first game of the preseason, so I'm not going to overreact. I know they didn't have Braden Smith at right tackle as well. So Blake Freeland is a little bit different compared to Braden Smith, especially in the run game. So I understand there are factors that will change. I get it. But not, for me, still a little concerning that a lot of the guys that were there last year that the Colts are banking on, hey, it's more coaching than talent. At least in week number 1 of the preseason, I was hoping for a little bit more improvement, I should say, George, and maybe what we saw.
Yeah, I feel like it was kind of a glass half empty, glass half full kind of a game. And it's really hard to know exactly what to make of it. I'd probably give him like a C overall if I'm grading it. But we didn't see a ton of them. I mean, that's one thing with only a quarter. It's hard to really judge. And Buffalo, they did do some blitzes and things, but at the end of the day, they're not doing an all-out defense either. So I thought it was good that the pass protection was generally, with first team, not second team. With the first team, the pass protection was generally pretty strong. Yeah, I don't really remember being fearful for Richardson on any of those snaps. Like, he doesn't even have a chance on this snap. So that was good. Deion Jackson, like you mentioned, had a couple good runs, which is good to see. But I'm with you. And the short yardage concerns me because there were so many things that went wrong last year, but that was one that even when they were still early in the year, when they were in contention and they were still, trying to catch Tennessee, and it was still looking like, hey, they could maybe get things together and make a playoff run, even though they were struggling. Even then, short yardage was costing them games. You go back to that game in Tennessee, and it gets stuffed, and then they end up, turning the ball over and it's pick six, and it turns the entire game. That's concerning to me because, yes, the offense is going to look a lot different when the regular season goes. We just mentioned they're not showing everything. Part of that's, I'm sure, going to be the push sneaks with Richardson. I'm sure they're going to use that, when the regular season comes around. And you would think those are going to be pretty effective given the fact that he's a tank and they can get guys lined up behind him and rugby scrum him over the line. But to me, it's concerning that, on Saturday, at least, the whole goal is we're going to line up hat on hat, see if you can push them off the line and get that. It wasn't even a yard, I don't think, on the last one. And it couldn't do it. So, is it something that, like, oh, season's over now and, red flag? I don't know if I'll go that far, but it's concerning. It's something that look, we've been saying all preseason, the one thing you do not want to see is like echoes of 2022. And that short yardage situation was almost a shout of 2022. And so, yeah, it's a concern.
Especially like you said, with Quentin Nelson, with Ryan Kelly, especially those guys alone, like you are banking, if it's a hat on hat, oh, we're going to win this 8 out of 10, 9 times out of 10 with the way you're paying them and the way that you feel confident going forward in their abilities. And again, it's one game. We'll see this week too when the Bears come to town. Maybe that we'll get a better read and more reps to actually, break down. Like I said, it's 3 drives, so it's still tough, but definitely still shades of 2022 were there, and kind of you felt that, which is definitely a little bit of a concern going forward. It is encouraging. Deion Jackson ran, I thought, really well, George. Looked pretty good. Definitely not making you say Jonathan Taylor who for sure, but definitely showed you that he has some burst as well. And again, looked pretty solid so far in his debut. But one area we were talking about before the pod, speaking of reminiscing of 2022, 2 other areas that kind of popped up, George, outside of just, the rushing, or I should say the offensive line, was kicking and penalties in the red zone. And we saw both woes also flare up on Saturday as well. Which one is more concerning to you? Matt Gay misses 1 field goal. Now, it was very windy in Buffalo, so maybe it's excusable. Was the missed field goal by Matt Gay more concerning to you? Or at one point in the drive, 3 penalties on the final in the red zone, 3 penalties on the final drive for the first team, where you had Farrell Brown holding, and then you had 2 penalties that were declined, and Michael Pittman Jr. offensive pass interference, and another holding call that both were declined because the Colts are already backed up. What's more concerning for you coming out of that? Is it the red zone penalties, or is it so far the kicking situation?
It's a good question because I think they're both, theoretically, you can remedy both of them because the wind certainly played a factor. I mean, I think there were 3 missed kicks down on that end. He was the first one. Buffalo missed one down there, and then the Colts missed an extra point as well with the backup kicker in there. So, but at the end of the day, the money that Matt Gay is getting to come in here and be the kicker, you want to see him make these challenging situations. And, ultimately it's a tie game if they make that field goal and the extra point. So, it doesn't matter. It's preseason, but it's emblematic of the fact that that's how costly these things can be in the regular season. It can literally be the difference between a win and a loss. But I feel like the same is true of the penalties because you've got to finish these drives. And that was beyond the short yardage situation. The other hallmark of last year's team, turnovers, which we saw with the pick, but they came back from that and didn't turn it into a 3 or 4 turnover game, which I feel like last year would have happened. The other big hallmark was not being able to finish off drives, getting down there and end up settling for a field goal or not being able to finish off in short yardage. And I mean, you talk about that last drive that Richardson's out there. Pierce has a catchable ball, a beautifully thrown football, the best throw probably Richardson had all day. That should have been a touchdown there, and he can't haul it in. And then they get the run down to the 1, which you figure you're going to be able to cash that in, which maybe with their short yardage, maybe I'm giving them too much credit, but you would think that's and that one's called back by a hold. So again, echoes of last year. Now, both those things, we'll see. There won't be wind. That much I can predict. There will not be a wind issue next week against the Bears inside Lucas Oil State.
Take.
So we'll see right away on that, whether that one's fixed. But I do think the penalty thing is something to keep an eye on now the rest of the preseason, because that's one of those things that it doesn't matter who's out there. You can play clean with the third team as much as you can play clean with the first team. So I want to see that improve, because it's those are the little things, and we've talked before about the record this year is not the most important thing. It's development, and specifically development of the quarterback. But those are little things that I think they do have a small impact on the development of the quarterback. Because again, we're talking about these things in a completely different way if Pierce catches that ball, but we're probably talking about this game in a completely different way if that drive just ends in the end zone. If that run stands up and they end up scoring, it's going to be, hey, he did some good things with his legs. He set up this touchdown, last drive into in the end zone. You just feel differently about it. And I don't think that's any different for the players. The fans and the media feel that way, but the players feel that way as well. Hey, last one was a touchdown. That little bit, the mental part of his development, how he feels about how he's doing, is impacted by these small mistakes that we saw last year that, again, in one quarter. So, who knows, maybe they were all fixed in the fourth quarter if they played a full game. But from the little bit of the window that we got, they're back again. And you just, week 1 of the preseason, not overreacting, not saying that this isn't, but it's something you want to see cleared up as the preseason goes on.
Like, obviously, we know kicking can lose you games, right? That's an obvious take. So I'm not trying to sit here and minimize kickers in general. We saw it week 1 last year at Hot Rod, how big of an impact kickers can have, right? But to your point, when it comes to development, when it comes to making Anthony Richardson's life easier, the red zone penalties are way more concerning. That's, I think, a bigger area of emphasis now going forward into preseason game number 2, and obviously going to the regular season, because like you said, you can overcome maybe a missed field goal here and there, and the Colts lose by 4 points, missed field goal, mixed extra point. Like I said, it's a tie game. But also, if Pierce catches the ball, the holding call by Pharaoh Brown doesn't happen, all of a sudden you're on the goal line or in the end zone, and now a touchdown right on either one of those plays, I should say, wipes out the 4 points that Matt Gay cost you with the extra point and with the and the field goal. So it's like you can overcome a missed kick here and there if you're executing and converting the red zone. And we've seen, George, if you were constantly setting for 3 and Matt Gay, doesn't miss a kick all year, but he's kicking 50 field goals, it's a problem when you're constantly settling for 3 and you can't convert once you get into opponent's territory, and especially once you get into the red zone. And like you said, to be able to have a really good third drive, move the ball between the 20s, and then again, even make a few plays down in the red zone, have a call back, you can't overcome those. It makes the development so hard, and especially too for someone that's going to be inconsistent, right? We know Richardson is going to make mistakes. So he's going to throw interceptions. He's going to make bad reads. He was inaccurate at times as well on some passes on Saturday. And that's going to put the defense in a bad spot and maybe directly lead to points for the other team. But so you're already going to put yourself behind the 8 ball a little bit, and you're going to accept those, mistakes from a rookie. But it's also so much more difficult if you're getting down there 2 or 3 times in the red zone and you're getting 3 points total or 6 points total, and you're not converting or constantly setting for field goals. That's really hard to overcome, and only adds like the stress of the offense to where it's like now you almost feel like, okay, we've got to the red zone 2 or 3 times. We're not scoring. I need to make a play here. And maybe that leads to a bad interception because he feels like I got to just air this out or be Superman, just kind of like your shirt. When you know what, if you're converting in the red zone, then all of a sudden the pressure's off everybody.
I think it's a really good point. I think when you have a rookie quarterback, especially one who, they've all said from day one, experience is the number one thing he's missing. The other guys, the veteran guys on offense, have to be on their game. They have to be that much better because he is going to make mistakes. So you can't compound that. You can't make a mistake, on the drive that he's doing well on, and you can't make a mistake to add to a mistake he made. And I absolutely think it's going to put more pressure on his shoulders. It could lead to injury. because it could be the kind of thing where he tries to make something happen in a situation that he doesn't need to. And he maybe, instead of going out of bounds, he fights for another yard, takes a hit that's unnecessary, or, hangs around in the pocket longer than he needs to instead of just getting out of there, throwing the ball away and takes another hit that's unnecessary. Like, you don't know. I mean, all these things add up. And I think he's already got a trillion things going through his mind. That Kylan Granson did a really good job talking about that last week during practice. That, when he was a rookie, his head was spinning and he wasn't a quarterback. So he can't imagine what it's like for Richardson. But he was really impressed seeing how calm Richardson's been in that storm. And I think when you've already got all that on your plate and you're already trying to fight through it and have the performances you have, when your teammates let you down on top of that, it's just another chip on that pile. And they're not going to be perfect. I'm not saying that. But the big ones, the holding penalty that wipes out a run to the one, the drop touchdown, those are the things that just can't happen.
Absolutely right. You got to have your teammates help you out, right? It's a lot for Richardson, and he's going to have to try to put them in a position to succeed, but also takes him off his play. Like, do your quarterback a favor here. Like I said, make a play and just make his life a little bit easier and take a little bit of stress off his shoulders. Hopefully, like I said, it's a good learning experience, especially for Shane Steichen, where he can kind of really now hone in on those mistakes and clean them up and make sure going forward. And again, the likelihood of Pharaoh Brown playing a significant portion for this team, very small, very slim. So maybe if we see the starters out there more, hopefully these mistakes aren't happening or happening less frequently, but definitely an area to watch out for sure here as we go through the preseason and especially as we go into the regular season as well. On the other side of the ball, George, Shaq Leonard played. Great to see. I think from a mental standpoint, I mean, he wasn't credited with the tackle or anything. I think he shoved one player. I think that was the most contact he had, was like trying to get a Bills player out of the way, but otherwise was not involved in any sort of tackles or anything like that. But I think from a mental perspective, just getting back on the field again. I know he played in I think 4 games technically. I know he left a few early, but just it's so long just to mentally get back on the field and be like, okay, I could do this again. Even though he didn't do anything on the field in terms of playmaking, I think that's a huge box to check now going forward for his return for week number 1 and his return to being the maniac as you know him.
Yeah, and I think the most important thing is he said, afterwards that he felt good. That's bigger than anything else. The stats will come if he feels like himself. The stats will come along with it. Huge mental hurdle, like you said, to get out there, go through the process, just even the game day process, getting ready in the locker room, going out there, warming up, coming out, playing the first quarter. Big step forward for him.
Great to see. Also, so let me ask you this, because I think 2 areas also we were watching on defense: pass rush, secondary. Especially in the secondary, there wasn't a lot of opportunities. I get it. So again, we're talking about a very small sample size here. I don't say impressed, but I was happy. I thought, especially, let's say for the first half, when a lot of the contributors that are going to be on this team this year were playing, I thought for the most part, for how inexperienced they were and not even having some big guns out there like Kenny Moore and Julian Blackmon out there in the secondary, I thought they held their own for the most part, George.
Yeah, it was a little bit surprising. I mean, you mentioned Moore's not out there. Julian Blackmon wasn't out there. Rodney Thomas.
Boy, Thomas setting the bar low.
But, well, I mean, because you had so much
You're not wrong, by the way.
there. I mean, the 3 guys that you're kind of thinking are going to be the guys that get them lined up and get them in the right position were not there. Kenny Moore, Julian Blackmon, Rodney Thomas, they're the guys that have played. You had Nick Cross back there at safety, who, didn't play very much at all last year as a rookie, still basically a rookie in most regards. You had a couple second-year undrafted guys at corner, and rookies came in for them. Like, it's a very, very young secondary, and the leaders, the veterans that you do expect to be there weren't there. So that could have gotten really ugly. I mean, it just, Stephon Diggs isn't playing and Josh Allen wasn't playing. The rest of that Bills offense was pretty much the offense you're going to see in week 1. And those are 2 huge pieces. So, there's no question about that. Sure. But they didn't look like they didn't belong. Again, it's only a quarter. So I know Darrell Baker got his hands on one, maybe should have had an interception, but gets a pass breakup. It's probably a big step forward for him too. And, a guy trying to earn a spot. Darius Rush, second half, right place, right time, finishes that interception off. Good sign for a rookie, and I think that's one of the things that they felt like bringing him in is he's a ball hawk And sure enough, very first time he's out there, the ball finds him and he makes a play. So there was some things to build on there. I thought the second half, too many easy throws. There were too many open guys. But again, you're talking about guys on both sides that probably aren't going to play a lot during the regular season. So pass rush, different story. The only real pass rush memories I can, that really stand out to me were Muhammad and Odangbo, and those are both in the second half. You'd like to see Kyle Allen under a little bit more pressure. But again, it was just one quarter. One of those drives started at the 13. So it's a very small sample size.
Very small sample size. But one thing that is concerning, I'll say, for both the secondary and then going back to the offensive line, George, is we got, like I said, the starters played very little, right? So we got a lot of time to see the backups. Depth in and the secondary is going to be a concern, which again we kind of knew coming in. But really, George, depth on the offensive line is a big concern. Poor Gardner Minshew, man. I'm sure he's going to be in Shane Steichen's office pleading to start against the Bears because he cannot be behind that second string line because they did him no favors whatsoever on Saturday.
Those first two snaps could not have gone much worse. I mean, he had no chance on either one of those to get sacked. It was a very quick sack in both cases. It wasn't a long developing play where he held onto the ball. They got beat right off the snap. I think the first one, Danny Henner got pushed back about 4 yards into the backfield. And then it was a one-handed sack. And the second one looked like a jailbreak. So you just can't, but on the flip side of that, well, Gardner's in there probably, and I understand from a personal health standpoint, begging, if you're Shane Steichen, I don't know if you want to put your rookie back there in that situation either.
That's a good point. Yeah, Gardner, we love you, but we can't have Richard. You could take the deluge of Bills defenders running at you. We can't put our rookie quarterback behind that and risk him getting body slammed by 3 or 4 free rushing players. It felt like, that was a big, big concern. But like I said, it's one of those where I think overall, George, I would say preseason game number 1 for the Colts is success. Obviously, some bumps in the road. Obviously, some concerns. This team has a lot more flaws right now than I'd say, things ironed out. Still basically a month ago before the regular season. But overall, entire team, offense, defense, special teams, I would say a pretty solid preseason debut. What about yourself?
Yeah, there's definitely things that need to be cleaned up. Special teams probably wants a few things back. But yeah, I mean, overall, no one got hurt except for Luby. Unfortunate that he gets a concussion there late. But otherwise, you come out clean. I think that's number 1 for every preseason game. Don't lose anybody. And yeah, I mean, all the other areas that we talked about, finishing drives, cleaning up some of the penalties, more consistency from the quarterback, those things will come in time. So, Gardner, I thought, was efficient. He was pretty much what he's been all through training camp. Took what was there, didn't really force anything. I don't think he's going to be an ultra aggressive guy, but 6 for 6, and he had the touchdown drive there in the 2-minute drill. So, considering the fact that his time out there started with 2 horrendous sacks, he also bounced back well from adversity and finished really well.
It's a good point. That's a good point. It's a nice drive to finish off the half and a nice way for the Colts to kind of, like you said, hopefully this is a theme of them bouncing back from adversity. It's going to be some rough times for sure, but obviously this year is going to be a lot about the development of Anthony Richardson and also overall as a team. Can this be a team to take a punch and deliver one back? We know last year that was not the case. Even 2 years ago at the end of the year, not the case as well either. Hopefully new regime in here, at least with the head coach, he kind of instill a different sort of character and toughness that this team was lacking the last few years for sure. So a nice test too coming up, George, of the Bears coming in for joint practices. We'll get you set for that on Tuesday. What to watch for, some exciting matchups as well. So this would be a really good idea, really good test to see where this team is growing and a nice little challenge as well. So we will be back here, the Blue Horseshoe Pod, on Tuesday, getting you set for Colts Bears joint practices. Download wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe to the Blue Horseshoe Pod on YouTube. We'll talk to you on Tuesday right here on the Blue Horseshoe Pod.